All right, so get this. Today, we're going deep on like a huge turning point in Brazilian history. The 1889 switch from empire to republic. But here's the thing. The source we've got, it isn't your typical history book. We're looking at a chapter from this book called Brazil, Heart of the World, Homeland of the Gospel. And let me tell you, it's got this whole spiritual angle on things. It really makes you think about how history, like, actually happens.
Yeah, what's wild is how this source is pointing to this whole unseen side of things going on back then, something most history books just completely miss.
So before we get into all that spiritual stuff, can we just set the scene a bit? What was the overall vibe in Brazil right before everything changed?
Okay, so picture this. Brazil's going through this massive identity crisis, right? All the forward-thinking folks, they saw the monarchy as this leftover piece of Portugal holding them back. But the Republic, now that was progress, a chance for Brazil to finally stand on its own 2 feet on the world stage.
So it wasn't just about swapping out rulers, it was like a whole cultural reboot.
Exactly. And this whole push for change, it got even stronger with a huge event when slavery was abolished in 1888.
Oh yeah, that must have really rocked the boat.
It totally did. This law, I mean, obviously it was the right thing to do, but it shook things up big time, especially for those conservative folks who, relied on slave labor. It basically poured gasoline on the fire for anyone who is already itching for a new Brazil.
So we've got this backdrop of social and political tensions simmering, right? Now, let's toss in that spiritual element. The source talks about this divine voice. What's the deal with that?
All right, this is where things get super interesting. The book describes this voice, kind of like, those pronouncements you see in the Bible, talking to spiritual beings. And this voice is basically declaring that Brazil, it's ready to grow up, be responsible for its own choices. No more spiritual hand-holding.
Whoa, so like a cosmic coming-of-age story for an entire nation.
Bingo. And with this new independence comes a shift in focus. All that spiritual energy, it's redirected towards guiding spirits in this place called the region of the cross and supporting Brazil more indirectly.
Okay, so this divine voice is kind of laying out a whole new spiritual order. But how does all this actually play out in the real world?
Well, the voice specifically mentions Ismail's temple, which is this central idea in the whole spiritual narrative as the place where these teachings will spread. The catch is it's all about personal transformation, not like violent revolution or anything. Think more like inner work, letting go of material things, that kind of stuff.
So instead of street protests and all that, it's about changing yourself from the inside out.
Precisely. And this peaceful transition thing, it gets even more emphasis when the voice says that the shift to a republic, it'll be bloodless, kind of like other big events in this homeland of the cross.
It seems like this whole idea of aligning with divine will and peaceful change, it's a big theme here.
Absolutely. And you see this reflected in the political side of things too, actually. The positivists, who were a pretty influential group back then, they played a big role in making sure the switch to the republic was pretty smooth. They were especially focused on preventing any kind of religious violence.
So you've got this crazy mix of spiritual guidance and down-to-earth political strategizing all happening at once. Makes you wonder if they even knew about each other's efforts. But tell me, who are the big players who actually made this transition happen?
So the republic was officially declared on November 15th, 1889, led by Marshal Deodoro da Fonseca and some other heavy hitters like Benjamin Constant and Rui Barbosa. But here's the kicker, Deodoro. He was actually close with Emperor Pedro II.
Whoa, talk about a plot twist.
Right. So how do you think Emperor Pedro II reacted to basically being kicked out?
I mean, imagine you're the emperor, used to calling the shots, and suddenly your buddy is leading the charge to replace you. It must have been quite a shock, right?
Oh, absolutely. Definitely some sadness mixed in there too. But you know what? Pedro II, he handled it all with some serious grace. He refused to fight back, chose peace over bloodshed, even though it meant leaving Brazil, the country he loved.
Talk about taking the high road. That must have been a heartbreaking decision.
There's this little detail that just gets me every time. It really shows how much he loved Brazil. When Pedro II was heading into exile, he asked for just one thing, a pillow stuffed with Brazilian soil to take with him. Imagine that, a piece of home, as you're being forced to leave it all behind.
Wow, that's heavy. Makes you wonder what was going through his head. So after all this went down, what kind of legacy did Emperor Pedro II leave behind?
This source makes him out to be like this super loved figure, someone who really built up this whole culture of love and freedom while he was in charge. And what's interesting is He didn't see being kicked out of power as like a failure, more like a letter of emancipation is how he put it. There's this quote where he says, "In sum, I am satisfied. It is my letter of emancipation. Now I can go wherever I want."
Wow, talk about a shift in perspective. He almost sounds like relieved, like a weight off his shoulders.
And it wasn't just Brazil that felt his good vibes either. There's this story about a South American politician who, when he heard the empire was done, he actually said he was sad to see the end of the only republic that existed in America, the Empire of Brazil. Pretty high praise, if you ask me.
Sounds like even his critics had to admit he was a pretty remarkable leader. But even though the whole political scene did a complete 180, this source keeps talking about spiritual Brazil. What does that even mean? Did this whole spiritual mission just keep going even after Brazil became a republic?
Oh, totally. Those teachings from Ismail's temple, they kept shaping the spiritual side of Brazil, guided by those unseen forces we were talking about. Think of it like this. While the politicians were busy setting up the republic, there was this whole other movement happening underground, working on people's hearts and minds.
Okay, so we've got these two tracks running side by side, the political and the spiritual, both shaping the nation in their own ways. But what did these teachings actually look like? How did they impact people's lives?
So Ismail's temple isn't like a real building or anything. It's more of a concept representing this like evolving spiritual consciousness.
Right.
It's all about tapping into this deeper understanding of yourself and the universe.
Uh-huh.
The teachings were big on personal growth, cultivating compassion, and this idea of spiritual evolution.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of like a roadmap for inner transformation. And the idea is by focusing on this inner work, people could actually make the nation as a whole better, even with all the political craziness going on.
So instead of trying to change the system from the outside, it's more about changing yourself from within and letting that kind of ripple outwards.
Exactly. It makes you think, how would a society that's focused on all that have experienced those early years of the Republic, would things have been different if everyone was like striving for personal growth and not so attached to material stuff?
Yeah. It's like a whole different way of looking at history. Instead of just focusing on wars and politics, we're suddenly considering this whole hidden spiritual side of things that could be shaping a nation's destiny. Makes you wonder what other historical events might have this unseen layer to them.
It's a good reminder that history isn't just dates and battles. There are often these deeper currents flowing beneath the surface, invisible forces that are shaping things in ways we might not fully grasp. And it makes you question, what role does spirituality play in the grand scheme of things?
This source is really pushing us to think outside the box, to consider that maybe there's more to reality than what we can see.
And that's the power of exploring these unconventional perspectives, right? They challenge our assumptions and open our minds up to new possibilities.
This whole idea of spiritual Brazil brings up so many questions, like, if this divine voice was guiding things, why let the monarchy end in the first place? Why not just keep things as they were if Emperor Pedro II was so beloved?
That's a great question. And it gets to the heart of this whole spiritual narrative, Maybe ending the monarchy was actually a necessary step for Brazil to evolve, even if it meant losing a well-respected leader.
So sometimes progress means letting go of what's familiar, even if it feels kind of backwards, like a divine paradox.
Exactly. It could be that this divine plan for Brazil, according to this source, involved embracing this new chapter as a republic, even if it meant some rough patches at the beginning. It challenges us to think about the long game, the bigger picture.
It's a fascinating concept, and it makes you wonder about free will versus destiny. Were the folks who orchestrated the republic acting on their own, or were they just like instruments in this bigger plan?
Now, that's a question that could be debated forever. And to be honest, this source doesn't give us any clear-cut answers. It just offers a different point of view, invites us to consider the possibility that there are forces at work that we can't even fathom. It's like looking at a puzzle with missing pieces. We get these glimpses of this spiritual narrative, but we're left to figure out the meaning for ourselves.
That's what I love about this kind of exploration. It sparks curiosity and encourages us to really engage with history in a deeper way. It's not about presenting some rigid dogma. It's about inspiring us to ask new questions and dig into the mysteries that are hidden beneath the surface. It's like we've been on this archaeological dig, uncovering these hidden pieces of knowledge that totally change how we think about how history happens.
And that's the cool part. The digging never really stops.
Yeah.
There's always more to discover, more connections to make, more layers to peel back.
So, thinking about all this, does this spiritual take on things change how you view those big shifts in history? I mean, we've been focused on Brazil, but what about other major changes like, the American Revolution or the French Revolution? Were there like unseen forces at play there too?
It's a really interesting question, and honestly, we may never have those concrete answers, but it's definitely fascinating to think about the possibility that these pivotal moments in human history, they were influenced by something beyond what we can readily understand. Maybe there's this hidden spiritual dimension to these events that we're just starting to get a glimpse of.
It's like we're being asked to reimagine history, not by changing the facts, but by adding this whole new layer of interpretation, a deeper understanding of the forces that could be shaping our collective destiny. It's both humbling and incredibly exciting.
Totally. And it's not about forcing some rigid belief system on anyone. It's about broadening our awareness, opening ourselves up to new ways of seeing the world and our place in it.
So for our listener who's been with us on this journey, what's the one thing you'd want them to take away from this deep dive into Brazil's spiritual history?
Don't be afraid to question the accepted story. Be open to exploring those alternative viewpoints, even if they seem a little out there or challenging. There's always more to discover, more to understand, more to appreciate about the complexity of history, especially when we consider that maybe, just maybe, there are unseen forces shaping how things unfold.
It's like a call to action, right?
Yeah.
To become active participants in how we understand history, to go beyond just accepting what we're told, and to embrace the mystery and wonder that's at the heart of the human experience.
And maybe, by opening ourselves up to these new possibilities, we might not only gain a deeper understanding of the past, but also find some guidance, some inspiration for navigating the challenges we face today and creating a more meaningful future.
It's been amazing exploring this unique perspective on Brazil's transition to a republic. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.